Etheria Restart is a grindy, pay-to-win PvP gacha game that follows the same formula of a lot of other grindy, pay-to-win PvP gacha games. So what sets it apart from everything else other than just being the newest one right now? I don't know. I'll be clear, I have enjoyed this game so far. I've put in, say, a good several hours these past 2 weeks, and so I wanted to share my thoughts and go over everything I've seen in this game until now. The gameplay, the progression, the systems, and just really look into the good and bad points of the game, for any of you still wondering if this game is worth trying, or for anybody still looking for an opinion to copy. So, we'll get into it. When you start off, you'll be going through the story a little bit. A story that's ultimately not that great. It pushes you through a couple scenarios in an instanced area, kill some things, get some chests, you see a couple nice cutscenes here and there, but the plot itself is pretty shallow. You meet a bunch of new characters, you do some stuff around the area, and you sort of just move on to the next thing. I think it's pretty safe to say that this isn't really a focal point of the game. Maybe something more to add structure, give context, you know. Point is, not that memorable, you're just here to progress further through the game for the most part. Very early on, you'll get introduced to the gacha. You have a few banners, top ones here are rate-ups when you're guaranteed the character on banner at 80 pulls. No having to deal with 50-50 bullshit that we're starting to get everywhere these days. The bottom ones are permanent banners with the same 80 guarantee for an SSR, but also have a soft pity increasing rate after 50 pulls. What that rate turns into, I don't know, it doesn't say. The middle one here is a select banner to guarantee a character of your choice. Lovely stuff. Rates are 1% for an SSR, which it's not the best, but they're pretty generous with handing pulls out so far, so I think it's overall fine. For reference, I've gotten some 400 to 500 pulls without having spent any money so far. So, you know, just a few. It's also worth noting that rate-ups aren't time-limited characters. As you can see here, these two are already in the standard set, even though they only got added recently. You'll also notice that there are actually 2 permanent banners. If you're not familiar, there are light or dark element characters that avoid having to deal with the RGB elemental system by virtue of being special, I guess. They're generally also just very strong units, so of course they're also rarer. Either at a quarter chance of all SSRs supporting the permanent banner, or you can get them in their own special banner. It'll cost 300 gems instead of 100 per pull. Something you'll hear a lot about is the idea of rerolling until either you get one of these characters, or at least some set of strong characters to help you smooth out progression. Whether you should do this, it's all up to personal preference. If you want to ensure a smoother start, maybe trying for a decent character pool to work with is worth it. If for some reason you can't enjoy the game without a certain character, sure, go for it. Having the right characters for certain content in this game really does help streamline progress, so it does make sense if you really wanted to min-max this shit that you'd want to guarantee something good, seeing as there is a very realistic chance that you just get shit all within your first account. I used to be very adamant about re-rolling for days to get a perfect start, but I've since realized from all the games that I've ditched that, you know, that's kind of just a waste of time. And you know, it's maybe just fun to work with what you're given in a sense. And so I've just stuck to my first account. I think it's all been fine so far, no problems in progressing, but I think I would be doing a disservice by not stating I eventually did get pretty fucking lucky in getting 3 LDs and a decent set of units to work with. Right, so we have all these characters, what now? Well, I think the thing to mention first is this set of quests called the Hyperlink Charter. Yes, this is just a menu solely for holding 5 more quest menus underneath. A bit of a side tangent. The game just has too many fucking menus. It's barely a week old, we have this shit. We have an event window with, 11 or so different tabs, each with their own sub-windows. There's the dailies tucked away in the corner here, and for some reason you have to collect these one by one, for no apparent reason. There's an achievements window, which, all these buttons, they move you to the same place, and it's just another mess of tabs to click through. And there's all the other stuff, there's a bunch of shops, there's your battle pass, there's the union where you collect a bunch of random stuff from there as well. I don't know if anybody actually cares about this, but I feel like a fucking rat scrounging for food every time I look around and see all these blue diamonds everywhere. Back to something a little bit more relevant. The hyperlink quests are pretty good indicators of what you should be focusing on. Getting your levels up, what you should be clearing next, it's a nice thing just to see at a glance what you should be doing, and getting you familiar with the systems of the game early on. Moving on, character building is pretty simple. 4 main parts very clearly separated here. Leveling will give you stats, the star rating though is the main thing here. Leveling that up will take materials, which generally you get from shops and other random places like event drops and your dailies, and taking a unit up to 6 stars uses up a lot of these, so you kind of have to be careful of what you're doing. Modules are equipment with main stats, substats, set effects, and it's something that a lot of you will be familiar with. You make sets with these matrix points under the piece, and you get these from farming bosses that we will cover in a moment. Beneath this we can level skills. The wheel gives us a decent chunk of stats for the first 5 levels of it. Then you get into using these lattices, which are the big limiter in building characters. Your supply of these isn't going to be that high, so make sure you know what you're investing in. Some of these skill increases are pretty big, like reducing skill cooldowns or increasing the chance of an effect by quite a decent amount. The middle thing here is upgraded with dupes, giving some stat increases and then ending with a 10% damage increase and reduction. It's not game-breaking amounts of strength for getting dupes, but it's a noticeable increase. Finally, shells are basically just weapons. No gacha rolling for shells, luckily, you can rest assured, but instead they're just another part of the grind. With their own matrix set points and stats you have to reroll, you know how it's gonna be. Generally, the character building is pretty simple, as most gacha games are. The pain points are going to be coming from your typical reliance on getting the right pieces from randomized drops. I'll move on to talking a little bit about the stages we need to farm now. All up on the top row, easy to find. Something I like here, by the way, is the little tags denoting which stages are for farming what, because, learning the new vocabulary in a game is already difficult enough. The main progression stages you'll be going through for a while will be pushing the various bosses within these shell and module farming stages. Now, these aren't going to be easy. The difficulty ramps up pretty high, and with each boss having different effects for you to build your team around, you'll need a lot of characters invested to be able to clear them all. For example, the most popular thing to farm right now is Doki Doki, a stage with a couple things to consider. The blue element means that red units are going to be pretty difficult to run here, since you'll be dealing with an elemental disadvantage. The main mechanic will incentivize you to run some controlling CC effects like a stun or a sleep, in order to break down that pretty strong defense buff that they have. And the stage, consisting of 2 waves of 4 to 5 enemies each, pushes you towards using more AoE focused characters. These limitations, along with how your pool of characters will mostly be different to a lot of other people's, is what makes this part of the game interesting. It's figuring out where to put resources, who to build, what teams to make, and this will be the core gameplay loop outside of the PvP modes, figuring out the right set of characters to push each stage and get stronger. One of the things that usually comes from this is people coming up with new solutions to bosses without using the strongest units for it. Sometimes finding new ways to use mechanics to overcome a challenge. This is one of my favorite things. It's seeing people discover these unique ways to adapt, with people doing things that might not particularly have been intended, but works within the system of the game. And so, it's been very disappointing to see so early on the removal of little interactions like Shadow being able to steal the buff from the Doki Doki stage, and changing the Veronica's buff extending interaction, even though they end up addressing it, giving compensation, character resets after the uproar from the community. I feel like now, there's still that lingering threat, that if someone finds an interesting way to use a mechanic in the game somehow, and the devs just don't like it, they can and will just, quote, bug fix it away. I feel like interactions like these, if they aren't game breaking, if they follow the rules of the game, they should be encouraged if anything. It's people interacting with your game. You should want this, right? But of course, in the grand scheme of things, this is just 2 small changes in very specific character interactions. In isolation, even though this is a step in the wrong direction in my opinion, the long-term state of the game will probably be fine if they decide they want to keep making small changes like this. However, as you might already know, there are more things that people are complaining about. The Aurora boss was changed in the final release to be immune to dot damage. Fair enough, but you can actually see that until you reach the level gate a couple days in. And even then, I think dots still worked, and that they had to hotfix it to change it to not work, as intended. One of the new characters, Hoyan, had a character trailer days before coming out. If you watch the trailer, she's being shown with a defense ignore, instead of what we now have in-game. No comments have been made about this change at all. Supposedly, some people are getting charged extra times when buying things in-game. This is unacceptable, but to my knowledge, nothing has been said on this either. All of these are issues in their own right of varying severity, but I think the biggest thing is the lack of explicit communication about these things. For the hotfixes, they were sort of just thrown in a list of other hotfixes as well, and then when people found them, it was sensationalized a lot as shadow nerfing characters. I think that's a bit much, but I think it is a little scummy to hide these things in there and not really acknowledge them. The other 2 points, they've just been left in silence for the moment. We're not really able to prove whether these things are done maliciously or just out of incompetence, but either ways, it's definitely a good reason to maintain some level of skepticism at this point. People will see this as a reason to leave. I just hope that they can get their act together and make this a decent game in the long run. Let's come back down to our progression purgatory. Something worth mentioning is that clearing a stage doesn't necessarily mean you're set to farm it. The auto farming system in this game essentially reruns the game on auto, so if you have an inconsistent clear or some specific manual skill ordering, there's a decent chance you end up failing subsequent tries. This puts a focus on having to specifically build PvE teams that are able to farm consistently as another hurdle to go through. By the way, you also lose 1 stamina every time you fail a run. One last thing I wanted to add to this section is another point that people are crying about recently. That is the difficulty in inferno modes, the current endgame farming stages. The issue isn't unfounded. There is a very clear difficulty spike in these modes that ends up with a Lily or a Shadow Sania in basically every inferno mode clear. It doesn't take much to realize how much of a problem requiring 2 rare LD units to clear basically any inferno dungeon would be a problem in the long run, basically forcing you to re-roll an account to stand a fighting chance. The thing about lack of good communications and not acknowledging anything wrong here is also very worrying, since there's no indication that anything will be done as of right now. I guess something to consider, something that I've heard as a counter to this, is the fact that we're only 2 weeks into the game, and maybe that's a reason not to be farming the endgame stages yet. Maybe we're just not geared enough, maybe we haven't found the right strategies, whatever else you might want to say to reassure yourself that this will be alright. But a player base is generally pretty good at spotting problems within a game, if nothing else. And the wait for a potential response regarding this, whether they want to do something about this or not, is not something people really want to deal with. I guess this is just a waiting game for now. But the longer we have to wait for things like this to be acknowledged, the more people will decide that they're just done with the game, that they're going to drop it. Because why waste your time dealing with something like this when there are so many other games out there to play instead? Let's move on. Once you do have gear decent enough for you to want to try PvP, you can go ahead and push into one of these modes. We have 2 types, a classic CPU battler where you just set a defense team and go attack other people's teams, and then we have the main draw here, RTA, where you draft a team, you go ban someone from the enemy's team, they'll do the same to you, and of course, you play against each other in real time. The general gist of RTA is that it revolves around speed first and foremost. If you're faster and you have the damage, you can kill them before they can do anything to you. If you're faster and you have CC, you can lock them down and slowly bleed them dry. Obviously, the reverse can happen to you as well if they just have better speed gear than you. But what if they can't kill you? What if you forego that speed and build more survivability? Well, maybe you might be able to survive their burst and return more damage to them and wipe them out instead, but then that might also open you up to other counters yourself. It's a mode about drafting team comps, identifying threats against you and finding ways to deal with them, or at least that's my interpretation, as someone who has very little experience with grinding RTA, so I'm sure there are a lot of other people who could give much more meaningful insight on the mode and its meta. Let's talk a little now about the problem that plagues all gacha games that decide to put some direct player conflict. I'm sure you know what pay to win might entail. It's in the name. You know how words work, I hope. This game is clearly pay to win, right? You spend money, you get an advantage. Or at least that's how I'd define it. It doesn't take much to see all the avenues that this takes place here. A simple one is spending more on pulling characters. You get dupes and you'll have some level of advantage in raw stats. Or you might just get more characters and have a larger pool of units to work with. Something very invaluable with RTA, where suppose you only have a few good units to work with. Your opponent ends up picking and banning them all. Well, you shit out of luck. Go next. Some other advantages, being able to straight up buy character materials, including the highly coveted SSR lattices, or maybe even getting some extra stamina to have more chances at better gear. And in the long run, I'd imagine spending close to 1,000 gems a day to max refreshes, something less feasible to non-paying players, giving more of a boost to how much a whale can farm and speed up building more characters. So yes, this game is very obviously pay to win, no surprises, but it does seem to be overall pretty well balanced. There have been people who have climbed pretty high despite not spending at all, or spending very little. And if you're not planning on joining the upper echelon of sweaty PvP grinders, you'll probably be fine either ways. Chances are you'll probably be too shit to be matched against that guy who spent your salary's worth on getting all their characters maxed. The main hurdle right now is getting characters built well, which obviously it's going to be a lot easier if you have a lot more resources by just spending more money. But at some point, I think the advantage of whaling diminishes to a point where it will probably be something that you can overcome. The advantage will probably still be there in some way, but just a little less impactful as we go on. Though I'm no expert in games like these, I'm sure someone else has better insight on this than I do. For those of you not wanting to play PvP, I'm not going to say that you shouldn't bother with the game, but you can clearly tell that that's kind of the core focus here. There is a plethora of different PvE content though. A core boss clearing stage, a tower of different PvE bosses making use of that 3D exploration in the story modes. You get the gist. There's no shortage of different things to do here. But the lack of strong story or characterization in this game to get attached to makes me feel a certain way towards someone also not wanting to engage in PvP. It kinda just feels pointless, you know? I mean, you're free to do what you want. I just don't get it. What, you want to push the PvE leaderboards or something? No man, that's kinda weird. So, I did not expect anything coming into this game. Despite that, I enjoyed my time here. There's a solid gameplay foundation, even if it is nothing new, and the experience of progressing through the game has been pretty fun. However, I'm still tentative on the game in the long run. There's a real possibility that they keep pissing on the player base and just waiting days after the fact to tell us, hey, that was just rain, don't worry about it, and then hand us an umbrella. But I also do think that if they handle the game well, we could get a new PvP game to grind long term. Overall, I guess the game's worth a shot, just don't get too attached. Thanks, subscribe, goodbye.